I note that we have a few members that are not here today yet. We have travel restrictions and travel problems throughout the Northeast and across the country, and I want to acknowledge those as we have members walking in here. That's great, but I want to acknowledge also that several members simply were not able to make today's meeting. Today, the committee will consider H.R. 351, the LNG Permitting Certainty and Transparency Act. H.R. 351 expedites the Department of Energy's process for approving natural gas exports to countries with which we do not have a free trade agreement. Since 2010, the Department of Energy has only issued final decisions on 5 of 37 applications to export natural gas to these countries. That is 5 out of 37 since 2010. As a result, America is squandering what I think is a boom in liquefied natural gas that has made America the world's largest producer of natural gas and oil that really began to develop in 2013. The Department of Energy's broken application process, I think, destroys good-paying jobs. It delays the ability of Americans to have great jobs today. It also keeps America from helping our friends around the globe who sometimes, especially in winter, have cold and dark days. They pay too much money, and they're held hostage by thugs around the world who do not share their natural gas. It's a great export from America to our friends around the world. I want to thank Congressman Bill Johnson from the great state of Ohio, Chairman Ed Whitfield from Kentucky. I also note Mr. Garamendi's here. John Garamendi, an Eagle Scout, friend of mine from California, for their leadership. I'm sorry? That's a good start. It is a good start, yeah. And I'm delighted that all three of you are here. We're expecting at least one other person, perhaps, but I'll have you all take the chairs here, Mr. Chairman. And I'm delighted if Mr. Pallone is able to make it once again. He's from the Northeast, and I don't know exactly that circumstance. But before we defer to anyone on this bill, I'd like to defer to the gentleman, my friend from Massachusetts, for any opening statement you'd like to make. The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, but in the interest of time, I'll forego a statement and look forward to hearing the testimony.
I thank the gentleman very much. As always, I want to acknowledge all three of you being before this committee. We count on your testimony. Mr. Whitfield, you're Exhibit A. So many times you come up here, you're so well prepared. You give the committee decisive and insightful knowledge about the bill, and we're delighted that you're here. As always, also, anything you have in writing will be entered the record. I encourage you to do that. Mr. Johnson, we're going to start with you, then go to Mr. Whitfield, then Mr. Garamendi. And Mr. Pallone, the gentleman from New Jersey, is now here. And welcome, Mr. Pallone. I'm delighted that you are here also. And also, please remember that when you do speak, to turn on the mic to where we can hear from you. Mr. Johnson, you're recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. This week, the House plans to consider H.R. 351, the LNG Permitting Certainty and Transparency Act. This important legislation will bring certainty to the Department of Energy's review process for LNG export applications, create American jobs, and provide a stable source of energy to our allies in Europe and around the world. During the 113th Congress, identical legislation passed the House of Representatives as H.R. 6, the Global Domestic Prosperity and Global Freedom Act, and long before its passage, this bill moved through the entire legislative process at the House Committee on Energy and Commerce. This process included a hearing, as well as an eventual markup at the Subcommittee on Energy and Power. A subsequent full committee markup followed, and the bill was placed on the Union calendar. The House Committee on Rules then established House Resolution 636, the rule for consideration of H.R. 6. After that rule was adopted, this legislation was debated, amended, and passed on the House of Representatives and passed the entire House of Representatives with an overwhelmingly bipartisan vote. 46 of our colleagues on the Democratic side supported this, and the President did not issue a veto threat. Because H.R. 351 has already gone through the legislative process, and given that the window of opportunity for LNG exports will not remain open indefinitely, it's important that Congress acts immediately on this legislation. If Congress fails to act, securing financing for constructing LNG terminals could prove difficult, as nations with near-term energy needs are forced to look elsewhere for that source. Potential geopolitical benefits, such as supplanting the influence of other exporters like Russia and Iran, while simultaneously strengthening ties with our allies, could ultimately be jeopardized. Additionally, if we delay, domestic economic benefits may fail to materialize. Specifically, the opportunity to put 45,000 unemployed Americans back to work by 2018, according to one study conducted for the Department of Energy. As you may know, there is currently no timeline for the DOE to make a decision on pending non-FTA LNG export applications. As a result, DOE has only issued a final decision on 5 of those 38 pending applications that it has received since 2010. H.R. 351 will address this current backlog by ensuring applicants receive an answer from DOE within 30 days, only after the pending permit has received its necessary environmental and construction permits from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. To be clear, this legislation does not allow applicants to skip the FERC process, nor does it allow them to bypass an environmental impact study under the National Environmental Policy Act. Furthermore, the legislation does not require DOE to approve the application once the company has received FERC approval. DOE will still have the authority to disapprove the application if they see fit. Simply put, in order to maximize American energy production, we must continue to enact smart policies. H.R. 351 is smart policy. The last Congress thought so, and it's time that we realize its full potential by passing this bipartisan legislation here in the 114th.
Ms. Johnson,
Mr.
thank
Chairman,
you very much for your testimony and for your authorship of this bill, and I appreciate it very much. Mr. Pallone, before you walked in, I announced that we were going to do a different order. Now that you're here representing the committee, I'd like to defer to you for your statements. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, and thank you for meeting today. I was afraid you were going to postpone this. I'm glad you actually decided to meet. I just wanted to say from a procedural point of view that I think this bill should be considered in the course of regular order so that new members can have a chance to consider it on its merits in a careful fashion and offer amendments at the Energy and Commerce Committee. I know the sponsor has said that we've seen this before, but I think we have a new Congress. You've heard me say this before on Keystone and other bills that have come up. I think with a new Congress, and because this is controversial, there should be an opportunity to have a committee hearing and markup in Energy and Commerce in this Congress and not reference, what's happened before. And for the same reason, the rule for the bill should not be closed, and there should be an opportunity for members to offer amendments on the floor. And I say this because many of us, including myself on the Democratic side, believe that this legislation is unnecessary and therefore, would like to have the opportunity to offer amendments. My point is simply the reason I say the legislation is unnecessary because the Department of Energy currently conducts a public interest review of all applications to export liquefied natural gas to a country without a free trade agreement with the United States. And this process is working fine. So there's no reason to have a 30-day limit on this public interest review after the environmental process is complete. To date, the DOE has granted final approval for 4 applications to export LNG, and 4 additional applications have conditional approval, and the DOE has approved all applications that have completed their required NEPA review. There is no backlog or delay, at the DOE to speak of. In other words, this bill says within 30 days of completion of the environmental review that the DOE has to make a decision about whether this is in the public interest. We don't have any backlog. We don't have any permit that is at that stage where the environmental review is completed that has not been reviewed by the Department of Energy. But this issue of the public interest review is very important because obviously there is going to be exports of liquefied natural gas. Nobody's saying that there shouldn't be. At least I don't know of anybody who's saying there shouldn't be any. But the issue about how much and whether or not a given permit should be approval is a very important one in terms of the national interest, because there are manufacturers, there are labor unions, there are many who are fearful that if we export too much, that there wouldn't be enough for domestic industry, or the price would go up, and that would also negatively impact domestic industry. All of us would like to see more manufacturing in the United States. You know, in fact, that since the recession, annually, for the most part, manufacturing in this country has gone up significantly. So we don't want to see that process ended or derailed in some way because there isn't enough energy available. And that's what this is essentially all about, and why this bill, I think, is wrongly trying to cut short, if you will, that public interest policy. Now, I know that the sponsor did mention one thing about Europe and Ukraine, and my understanding is that it's very unlikely that this LNG is going to be exported to Europe, or really as a factor with regard to Russia, or at least European part of Russia and Ukraine. I know there was some concern that this was a way of alleviating the fact that Russia is now limiting energy sources to the Ukraine and other European countries. Fact of the matter is that the price is much higher in Asia, and the Asian countries, be they China, Japan, whatever, they have set up the process in their ports to accept this material. You know how it works. In other words, the pipeline takes it to a port in the U.S., it's liquefied, goes overseas, and then they make it into gas again. Those facilities are available, and the price is such that this is all going to go to Asia. It's not going to go to Europe. They're not in a position to actually do that in Europe at this point, and the price is so much lower that it's unlikely that that would happen in the near future. So I don't think you should see it from that perspective. But even the fact that the sponsor mentions that, to me, is another reason why we shouldn't have this shortcutting of 30 days, because this is the very kind of public interest review, what's in the interest of the United States and where this stuff is going, that the DOE should have the time to deal with. But again, that isn't a problem right now. All of these have been approved that met the NEPA environmental review. So I just think it's unnecessary. But in any case, Mr. Chairman, I hope you would consider having an open rule and having the opportunity to have amendments. And I'll yield back.
Mr. Plone, thank you very much. Mr. Whitfield, you're a star witness here day after day after day, and I know you've got this down. But it's good to see you. Hope you had a good weekend.
I did, and thank you all very much for giving us the opportunity to be here. We appreciate it very much. I'm delighted to be here on behalf of H.R. 351, and thank Bill very much for introducing this bill. I think during the discussion about export of LNG to non-free trade agreement countries over the last year, the one aspect that has affected me the most are the number of representatives of countries that have come to us and have been pleading with us to step up our export of LNG, particularly since we have such an abundance as a result of the shale revolution. And Mr. Plone, who I have a great deal of respect for, talked about the Russian situation, and with the Russians recently making the decision not to be building that new gas pipeline into Bulgaria, but going to Turkey instead, I think that reiterates the need for additional liquefied natural gas in Europe. Now, the Lithuanians have been here, people from Hungary have been here, and they're pleading with us to do this. I would also say that I don't see why we should have a rebuttable presumption that it's okay to export natural gas to that it's in the interest to export natural gas to a free trade agreement country and not to a non-free trade agreement country. That's all H.R. 351 is talking about, to non-free trade agreement countries. Does not impact in any way the very detailed process that FERC goes through in making the decisions about the siting of the pipeline. So that has not changed in any way. All we're really talking about here is, in some instances, by the way, the Department of Energy has finalized to non-free trade agreement countries the day after FERC completed its environmental review. But in other cases, it's taken them forever, and as you said, they've only approved 5. So there seems to be a lot of disparity here for no apparent reason. So this bill simply sets those guidelines, and since the only responsibility that the Department of Energy really has is over the commodity, not the siting, not any of that, just is it in the public interest of the country. So that's why, and the House has already approved this bill last year. 48 Democrats voted in favor of it. So I think it's a common sense piece of legislation. And I would also support Mr. Pallone's request that we have an open rule, allow some amendments, because in my view, that's when you come up with the best product, when you have amendments, people debate it out, argue it out, and then we vote. So with that, I would respectfully urge you all to adopt a rule to let 351 go to the floor.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Garamendi, you've already been welcomed in a great way. I'm delighted that you're here. I know you have an amendment, and the gentleman's recognized to speak on that.
I do. Thank you very much for the courtesy, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Indeed, I do. The debate over whether we are going to export LNG, and it's not a debate, we are. We are, in fact, exporting it beginning this spring. The Cheniere operation in Texas will be up and operating sometime in the next few months. How much we export, that's a question that I think is a good one. Mr. Pallone has raised that question. My personal opinion is that there's a sweet spot where a certain amount of export takes place without significantly altering the availability or the price of natural gas in the United States. And that is a question that I think is appropriate for the Department of Energy and for all of us to weigh in on. The bill itself, in my view, neither here nor there. But I do think that if we have 45,000 jobs building all of these export terminals, which is probably the case if we do have that number of terminals, we have a chance to expand that perhaps tenfold for jobs in the United States. If this LNG is exported on American-built ships, which we can do with American crews, which is already the case for the import of LNG, it's a safety issue. I think we have an opportunity to really do some good for the American economy here, a chance to really build the American economy using a strategic national asset, natural gas, because it is an asset and it is strategic. It's already allowing, that is the low price of it, allowing us to rebuild our manufacturing base here in America. Let's take it one step forward. Take that natural gas that can be exported, put it on American-built ships with American crews, and we're probably talking perhaps 500,000 American jobs in shipyards all across this nation. We used to do this 20, 25 years ago. We did build many of the very first LNG tankers. We lost that market for a variety of reasons. We can get it back. The technology is available to us. Today, we can take technology, some of which we have. The NASCO shipyards in San Diego are building LNG-powered tankers, the first in the world. So we can just take it a step further. Cheniere itself is likely to need 100 ships. Now, if we do all the rest 35, I don't know, maybe we multiply that 100 by 35, and oh my goodness, we're talking about a book of business for the American shipyards that goes for the next couple of decades. Thousands upon thousands of jobs, and the supply train in America is not just the steel and the men and the women at the shipyards, but it's the electrical systems, the control systems, all of those things that are necessary, the pumps. This is a big, big opportunity for America, and my suggestion is we amend this bill. And we simply put in an amendment, I wrote this, and, everybody knows that I'm not perfect. Certainly my wife will tell you that. But I think it's a pretty good start, and in the process of legislating, we can make improvements on this. So this simply says that for the next 5 years, as this LNG ramps up, it be with American crews on those ships that are leaving the American ports. And then 5 years from now, the ships themselves would be American-built. It's going to take about that much time for the shipbuilding industry to gear up, to cut the deals with perhaps Korea or others that are now building these ships to bring that current technology in. I had a conversation, I think it was either Lockheed Martin or Boeing. They said, well, those tanks, they're a lot like the tanks on our rockets, our liquid rockets. We make those. We just make them bigger. So this is a big, big opportunity. And I want to point out to you an example of a country that is using its import of LNG to strengthen its shipbuilding industry. Right now, the president's over in India. We see the pictures of the parades and all that goes with it. India has a tender out today for American natural gas to import American natural gas into India. They need a minimum of 10 tankers to bring that gas to India. And India says, as part of that tender, 3 of those ships will be built in India. I'm going, well, there's a good idea. Why don't we say 3 of those ships built in India? Good. 3 of them built in the United States, and somebody else can have the other 4. This is how we can build the American manufacturing sector. This is how we can put people to work, using a strategic national asset, natural gas, couple it with 2 other strategic national assets, the maritime, the mariners of America, absolutely essential for our national defense, and the shipyards, equally essential for our national defense. So why not? Why not do it? Anyway, that's my amendment.
Mr. Garamendi, thank you very much. I'd like to defer my time to the gentleman from the Energy and Commerce Committee, Dr. Burgess. Dr. Burgess, recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Chairman Whitfield, thank you for being here today. If I'm recalling correctly, we actually did a number of hearings on this in your subcommittee last Congress. And we did a markup on this in your subcommittee, and we did a markup in full committee. Of the 5 approvals of the 37 requests, if memory serves, 2 of those approvals occurred after you scheduled your markup in subcommittee. Is that not correct? Secretary Moniz actually got interested in this problem? And it was because of your activity at the subcommittee level that the Department of Energy responded. And I think that's an important point, because had you not done that, we would be talking about 3 out of 40 applications that had been approved. So this is, you moved the needle on this, and we're very grateful to you for having done so. Last, for those who don't know, in addition to being on me being on the all-powerful Energy and Commerce Committee and the Omniscient Rules Committee, I'm also a member of the Helsinki Commission. And last May, after the Maidan activities occurred and Mr. Yanukovych left the country, they were in the position of having to choose a new president relatively quickly. They did not plan on an election to occur at the end of May, but suddenly they were having to do so. And the Helsinki Commission was requested to be there as an election monitor to assure that the elections were free and fair, and that there would be a measure of respectability imparted to the elections, and then credibility visited upon the person who won those elections. At that time, it was not known who was likely to win. But I remember going over there and speaking with people in the government in the Ukraine. We had just a week before passed a bill in the House of Representatives to provide $1 billion of emergency aid to the Ukraine. Vladimir Putin countered and said, I've just recalculated your natural gas bill, and it went up $1 billion. So this is the pressure that new government formed by its people who resisted some of the problems they had in their previous government, did the democratic thing and elected a new president. This is the kind of pressure that they're under. Now, I also traveled back to the Ukraine at the end of October because they had their parliamentary elections, which time they affiliated much more strongly with Europe than with Russia and the previous Soviet Union. And we see what has happened since then. Of course, last April, Russia reestablished itself as primacy in the Crimea. And we all thought we were at a point where forced nationalization was something of the 1930s, 1938, 1939. It doesn't happen now in the 21st century, except that it did. And then we watched earlier in the year when Russia bit off several of the oblasts, the states in eastern Ukraine, and is now trying to establish a land bridge to Crimea so that it will have the ability to, for its ports in Crimea, and it will have land access to those ports. So don't think for a minute that this is not a serious geopolitical issue. Now, for whatever reason, the United States has chosen not to participate in providing lethal aid to the army in the Ukraine. But we could provide, we could facilitate, we could at least stop inhibiting, or cease to inhibit the flow of natural gas, which has a geopolitical consequence to the people in that country. And if they lose in their endeavor to keep their sovereignty from Russia, it will be a very different world that emerges in the next 10 or 15 years' time. So this is important work that you are doing. It has, it has a significant economic consequence for the state of Texas. And for that, I am very grateful. I don't want to see gas flared down in the Eagle Ford shale. I want to see it loaded onto ships at Texas ports and sold to the people in Eastern Europe and the Ukraine. I think there is merit to, a lot of merit to what you are doing. And I'm grateful that you brought the bill forward. I realize it wasn't the timeline that Mr. Pallone wanted, but I think it's important. We have heard a lot about this in your subcommittee during the last Congress, and the world is not waiting for us. Sure. Yes, I'm happy to yield to the gentleman.
I don't, believe me, I'd be the first one who would be advocating that we help the Ukraine, and have. But my only point, Dr. Burgess, is this, and that is that there's no reason, there has been no delay with any of these requests. In other words, the way this legislation operates, once the environmental review is completed, there's a 30-day window for the public interest review. There's been no delay in the sense that there's any application that has gone through that review that is not now, has either been approved or conditionally approved. But beyond that, and again, I just think
I reclaim my time?
Days, yeah, I mean,
and I would like for Chairman Whitfield to perhaps provide some, we heard from people who felt that the Department of Energy was withholding activity on these export licenses, did we not?
Well, yes, we did, and we did feel like that our hearings and this bill in particular put a little fire under the feet of the Department of Energy. Not to say they were deliberately doing it. I don't know if they were or not, but the fact was they were not being approved, and once we started moving, then they started paying more attention to it. So I do.
But would the gentleman yield? It may be that you have a problem with the environmental review, but what I'm saying, the way the bill is set out, the 30 days doesn't start until the environmental review is completed. And what I'm saying, there haven't been any held up after that environmental delay is completed because of the public interest review. And again, my argument to the sponsor and to you, Dr. Burgess, is that it's for the very reason that these issues are important to our international policy and our manufacturing base, that I think to have a 30-day window is a mistake. In other words, these are very issues that are important to our national security, to our international relations, to our domestic manufacturing. So why would you want to have a 30-day straitjacket? I mean, 30 days is not very long.
Would the gentleman yield?
I'd be happy to yield.
2 points. Number one, I agree with Mr. Pallone in that there needs to be some thought into how much liquid natural gas we export so that we do not place the demand here in America at risk. And that's exactly why the legislation keeps that decision with the Department of Energy. They get to make that decision. Number two, when we talk about a delay and the fact that only 5 have been approved of the 37 or 38 applications, it is a very expensive process for these companies to go through that FERC process. You're talking about millions and millions of dollars. Now, I don't have the exact figure right here in front of me, but I've heard somewhere on the order of $100 million. So, and I don't know if that's accurate or not, but I know it's a lot of money. And not everybody has the wherewithal of a Cheniere or some of the other big companies to put that money up front and then wait indefinitely for the Department of Energy to move. What we're talking about with this legislation is bringing some business certainty so that these companies that are ready to start constructing LNG terminals can have some certainty that if they put that investment forward, that they're going to have a reasonable response from the Department of Energy in order to move the ball forward. And I yield back, sir.
Well, if I recall the testimony correctly, I don't remember specifically which company, but even a green light from the Department of Energy, it was 1.5 years and probably several $billion before product actually was departed the shores of the United States. Well, I thank our witnesses today, Mr. Chairman. I thank you for bringing the bill to us, and I'll yield back my time.
Can I just make one other comment?
Excuse me. One moment, please.
Sure.
Does the gentleman wish to have a minute back?
Yes.
Gentleman's recognized, Dr. Burgess.
I'll yield to the chairman.
Well, thank you. I just want to point out that when the Hungarian representatives came to us, they talked about they were already negotiating with the Croatian government that's building a facility to accept LNG in anticipation of our moving from here. And, of course, in Lithuania, they're developing the facilities there as well. So,
Yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. The gentleman from Massachusetts recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm going to forego any questions because I think we may be on the verge of making history in this committee. Chairman Whitfield said that he favored an open rule. We haven't had one yet. He's the first Republican that's come up here and asked for one. So I want to rush this to conclusion so that we can vote on an open rule and Mr. Garamendi's amendment can be made in order. And I would also say there were 58 new members of this Congress who weren't here when we did this last year, who did not have a chance to participate. And so an open rule would give everybody what they want. And so I don't want to spoil this moment. I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Yeah. Judge Hastings does not seek time. Gentleman's recognized. Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Mr. Woodall, Mr. Stivers, gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be fairly brief. I wanted to just take off on something that the gentleman from Texas was just talking about. I appreciate the sponsor, the chairman, and the ranking member, and the gentleman from California for being here. Appreciate the gentleman from California's amendment as well. Mr. Chairman, I'm curious, in your subcommittee, I think there was testimony that everybody understands the FERC process, but there's some real mystery that surrounds the Department of Energy process, and it seems to be open to more manipulation. That, do you think this might help solve that problem?
well, I do. I mean, it's about transparency, and we did not feel like it was really transparent over there, and that's why this bill has been introduced. I think you even refer to it as transparency. That was the purpose of it.
And to the sponsor and the chairman as well, do you think maybe we should try to put some processes around the Department of Energy process to make it a little more clear instead of, leaving it shrouded in mystery? I think, this timing helps a little bit, but is there a way to maybe make it more clear what they're supposed to do, be a little more directive?
Well, of course, they've got to find it in the public interest, but did you want to comment on that, Bill?
Well, certainly we give the Department of Energy some latitude. We're not trying to do the Department of Energy's job. We're just trying to get them to act responsibly and timely. And we certainly don't want to, as I mentioned earlier, we did not get a veto threat by the President on this legislation when it passed the House before. We've got a similar bill being introduced in the Senate at this point, and it looks very likely that we're going to be able to go to conference and give the president something to act on. And the Department of Energy works for the president, so we don't want to come across like we're trying to make day-to-day tactical decisions. But a 30-day timeline certainly gives them enough time to manage that process once FERC and everything else is completed.
Sure, and I understand, and I'm not asking whether we want to make the decisions for them. I guess my question is, do we want to maybe create a framework for the decision, so to take some of the shadows and mystery out of the process for the folks who are applying? And I know we chose not to do that here, and maybe it doesn't make sense, but...
Well, we chose not to do that at this time. We wanted to see what the Department of Energy made a decision to do as we move forward with this legislation as something we can...
And maybe this is a good step-by-step approach, so I appreciate that. I do want to thank the gentleman from California for his amendment, and my understanding is your amendment is WTO compliant?
It could be. In its present form, it probably is. We need to go at this in much more detail, and that's our goal, to make it compliant. There are different ways we can get there. This is a way that speaks to national security and therefore would be as a national security issue. Is that contentious? Probably, but it's also other countries have used their national security waiver, as have the United States, so we believe it is.
Great, thank you. Gentleman from New Jersey, sure.
Well, if I might, Mr. Chairman, I have just a couple of documents to add to the record.
Without objection.
Thank you.
I know that we don't want to belabor this, but I just would caution again. I mean, we're talking about 30 days for a very important review. I think it's a very short period of time. One of my concerns, frankly, is that it's very likely that if the DOE only has 30 days and they think there's a real potential problem, that they might just deny the permit in the public interest rather than spending the time for another couple of months to actually to do a thorough review. So I just don't see, I mean, all of you on the Republican side seem to think that this 30 days is a good thing. I think it's a very short period of time that could easily lead to denial if the DOE thinks that they haven't had enough time to review it.
One follow-up to that. Does the gentleman from New Jersey think the process at Department of Energy is transparent today?
Well, my understanding, and again, I feel like I'm just repeating the same thing, and I don't mean to do that.
Apologize.
I think the problem is I'm kind of guessing here, that you're concerned about the environmental review. In other words, remember, this 30 days doesn't start to click until the environmental review is completed. We don't have any applications now that are pending that haven't been approved that had completed the environmental review. So again, if, not that I'm suggesting you go back and give some kind of deadline to that, but there doesn't seem to be any problem with the DOE doing the public interest review once the environmental review is completed. And this legislation only goes to that DOE review and says it should be 30 days beyond the environmental approval. I just think that 30 days is not sufficient given a lot of the things that we've discussed here today in terms of what's, the international impact, the manufacturing impact domestically. That's my only point, but I think I made it, so I don't want to keep.
Thank you.
Well, will the gentleman yield to me for one moment?
Mr. Chairman, I yield.
I would like to just clarify one thing, because when I was speaking about an open rule, last night I was with Senator Blunt, and we were talking about the legislative process and talked about the regular order. And so for me personally, I like modified rules. Open rules allow people to offer amendments. But on this piece of legislation, I want all of you to know that the official position of the Energy and Commerce Committee is that they're requesting a closed rule on this bill. So I want to present this letter to you from the Energy and Commerce Committee, and I was speaking from my personal view.
No objection, that'll be in the record. I'd like to come back and to engage both of you on this issue in a minute, though, if I can. Gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Georgia. Gentleman does not seek time. I do not see anybody else that's going to seek time, so I'm going to reclaim my time. Mr. Garamendi, I think we're here to expedite procedures to get things done. Is that the essence of this? Okay. I like your idea. Well, hold on. The second section requires that LNG be transported on U.S. flagged ships until 2012 and on U.S.-built ships thereafter.
2020.
2020. But evidently, we don't have any ships right now that can do this, and it's going to take 5 years.
To build the ships, that's correct.
Build the ships.
To build new ships, that is correct.
Okay. Help me out here. How many do we have today?
To meet the requirements of this particular bill,
Well, how many do we have today?
there are 3 ships that were built in the United States that went to foreign flags some years
Are not
ago. They
flagged.
have been reflagged 3.
They would have to be reflagged.
They are now reflagged.
They are now reflagged.
So we have 3 that are reflagged. That's correct. Now, under the,
How many, thank you.
yes, sure.
How many ships are you envisioning? Because the gentleman in testimony to us, and I've not sat through this, Dr. Burgess has, members on this committee. We talked about a lot of work, a lot of ships, a lot that would go on, but it's going to take 5 years to build these ships. So I'm just under the point where if we want to get it done, let's go get the dang thing done. Let's do it. But this amendment, if we put restrictions on it, says, but hold on and wait.
Mr.
Now, can
Chairman,
anybody talk about that, Mr. Whitfield?
Well-
Because I take very seriously, and by the way, I respect what you think about what this committee ought to do, and we're open to suggestions. We get them whether we want a suggestion or not. And I'm glad you said that, but my only point is, but now if I go to this, it seems to hold it up. And we were here to hurry up.
Gentlemen, will the gentleman yield?
Just 1 second. If the gentleman,
Well, I mean, my priority is to get this bill through because we do want to expedite this process to export liquefied natural gas. The reality is that you're going to have a number of years to build these ships. I personally, not speaking for the Energy and Commerce Committee, because I'd like to present this letter from them.
yes, sir, and you did, and we've accepted that.
But I personally like modified open rules, whatever, just for the process. But the priority is to get this bill passed to expedite the export of liquefied natural gas.
That's what I heard you say. And then I heard kind of comma, but we'd like to also make sure that all of our country, including workers, shipbuilders, everybody else, but what we're trying to do is get this done. Okay, I told the gentleman I'd come back to him. Gentleman,
Let me just make a couple points. I mean, the majority of these new facilities won't come online for at least another 4 years or so, right? That's number one. So this amendment or a revised amendment to the floor, and we could all have a chance on voting for something that will support American jobs. Under a closed process, under the closed rule process that the committee is recommending, basically, you know, you got to take it or leave it. You can't improve it. And as everybody said, there's no such thing as a perfect bill. So, given the fact we have all the time in the world, I mean, and I'm talking about a day or two this week to debate this, why not do this right and open the process up? So we get hung up on whether Mr. Garamendi's bill will delay everything for a year or whatever. You know, open the process up, let them have a chance to make some suggestions. We can debate it on the floor. There are 58 new members. We ought to have that chance. I think. Yeah. I'm happy to yield if I can. Happy to yield, Joe.
Allowing to help us, because I think you're helping to answer my question, and I believe help us get closer, both of us.
I think this is working. My amendment would not in any way delay the process of expediting the approvals through the Department of Energy. That's going to go, as it goes, this bill passes or not, that process is underway. What my amendment does is after that approval, and after the facility is built, and Mr. Whitfield is quite correct, we're talking about a significant period of time before these additional terminals will be built. Just the construction itself is very extensive and very long. But when that facility is built, then for the next 5 years after this would become law, American mariners would be on those ships that leave that facility. That is a national safety issue that already exists in law for the importation of LNG. So that would be the export, so that mariners would be on those ships. And then 5 years would go. During that 5-year period of time, there would be a book of business available to the shipyards who then look to this future opportunity and go, yeah, I'm going to build these ships. And they would then bid with the exporters. They would bid with the exporters for the construction of the ships. 5 years out, ships would be coming online. Clearly, we are at the nascent state of this process. It would undoubtedly, as the bill would move through the process of legislation, information would be available to us and we would tweak the bill. We're not going to have 100 ships available on the first day after 5 years. There'll be a certain number available, so we'd have to seek modifications.
And I don't want to belabor this point, and I think your amendment is fine the way it is, but, you know, here's a radical idea. If there are some people who don't think it's fine, then maybe we ought to have a little discussion beforehand, have an open rule, bring it to the floor, vote up or down on it, and, you know, maybe do something that might have a chance of seeing the light of day. But anyway, that's the only point I want to make.
Thank you very much.
Gentleman yields back his time. I'd like to ask a question. First, I'd like to defer to the gentleman in the author of the bill.
Like you, Mr. Chairman, I think there's merit to Mr. Garamandi's bill with his amendment. In the interest of trying to accomplish what we're trying to accomplish here with expediting the process with a piece of legislation that has already undergone rigorous review, the committee process and regular order, I would suggest that perhaps Mr. Garamandi's bill as a standalone bill would get significant support from across the Congress.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask a question to Mr. Whitfield. Mr. Whitfield, you represent the committee. Has testimony when you went through this process was, I'm not trying to hold this against you, I'm trying to ask you a question. The gentleman knows that I'm trying to help him. Was this issue discussed about ships, the availability of ships, the flagging of ships, and national security issue implications, anything related to looking at this issue?
Well, there was some discussion about that, and the decision that we made at the time was that because of the length of time to have these ships constructed and built and seaworthy, that we wanted, our priority was to change this law so that non-free trade region countries have access to our refined natural gas. That was the priority. And then I would also say that when the bill came to the floor last year, there were 3 or 4 amendments that were voted on the floor on the bill last year. I don't think any of them related to.
I offered an MTR. I offered an MTR and it was turned down for procedural reasons.
Yes, sir.
But there's a reason I'm not on the Rules Committee. But
The slot's open.
Well, Mr. Whitfield, I'm really not trying to get at anything other than, has this issue been thought through to where you as members who are most thoughtful about this, do we understand the good answer? where we can look at each other and say, great idea, because I think, just the way I read it, it's not as straightforward as perhaps I'd like it to be. But maybe what we do is talk each of you into, once this passes, it's got to go to the Senate, maturing the idea, calling it a victory. It'd have to come back over here, be be debatable, but non-amendable, but get it in conference.
And I would love to see that with we'll be passing a lot of bills relating to energy, gas, and oil, and everything else. We'd love to talk to that.
I mean, I think, oh, good, okay. Or better. It is a rare day when Mr. Pallone can sit in here and see us trying to work sincerely together. And he is a part of it, Mr. Garamendi, Mr. Johnson, all of us. And I don't want that letter, that item passed, but I think that you look at each other and say, we can work on this.
Mr. Chair. I don't know. With the chair, you
I would yield to the gentleman from Georgia.
in support of the chairman and what he's saying, I think you just hit on something that is very important. It's been lacking, and I think something that's going to come is the process working between this bicameral legislature. And this is something that has been bad, Mr. Your amendment is there's merit to it. We're not denying the merit. I think in this part, it also goes to the very fact of what this bill does is the constant delays of government and how it, but we can work this through in the process. And I think, Mr. Chairman, putting this on the floor, moving forward in respect to what you're saying is encouraging to see, but also encouraging that there is another body that will hopefully be working and going through things like conference committees and things that some new members like myself have not watched it work. So I think the chairman's right. Let's move this forward. Look at the aspects as we go and go from there. And that way you'll back.
Gentleman yields back, time to jump in the Massachusetts.
I would say that none of the microphones are working.
Did you catch on?
I did. That I would just say that before we get to the problems between the House and the Senate, we ought to resolve the problems right here in the House. And all I'm suggesting is one way to do this is to allow the gentleman to be able to offer his amendment or have an open rule, and let's refine it before we go to the floor. It'll take maybe a few extra, maybe an hour more, to debate his amendment, if that, not even that probably. We ought to have an open process here. This is one of the problems, is that when you don't go through regular order in this new Congress, you got 58 new members, nobody has an opportunity to improve it. And yes, you can say that, well, down in the conference committee meeting, whenever that may be, we'll talk about these issues. That is not a substitute for a deliberative, open process on the House floor. And I would hope that we could have an open process on this, and this would be a good way to kind of correct some of the sins of the past. So I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I thank you for the courtesy and the interest of the committee members. We welcome an opportunity to present this on the floor or any other time. The suggestion of a standalone bill, we will do that also. This is an enormous opportunity for America. As part of our national defense, as part of our national security, to enhance our shipbuilding industry and our merchant marine, all of those things come together. I recognize the position that you and the committee are taking here with regard to this particular bill. Whatever your decision is, I will move forward with this, and I'd love to work with my colleagues to my left. Oh my goodness. My colleagues and others who are interested in the American shipbuilding industry. And if it's your desire to move this forward without this amendment, I understand that. And then I'll come back and look forward to working with all of you and trying to move this forward.
Jim yields back his time. As a matter of fact, the gentleman and I looked at each other a minute ago, and I thought I saw that in you, which is why I said what I said. So that's where we're going to leave it. I thank the gentleman. I think that all of us should take this to heart, not only what you said, Mr. Whitfield, not only what the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Plum, said, and certainly Mr. Garamendi and Mr. Johnson, but we've got to get closer to working together. We got to get closer to listening to each other. We've tried to do that. I tried to do that. I think you did too. But we've got to work in the best interest of the American people for jobs. This is a jobs bill. It can be a bigger jobs bill when we understand the implications. This is the hearing portion. I want to thank each of you for being here today. Thank you very much. This ends the hearing portion of H.R. 351. Our guests, I thank them for being here. They're now excused. And Chairman Kennedy should have a motion. Yeah, if I could announce to the committee and to our visitors, we are without electricity in some regards. We're now back. So our sonographers who are...
We fixed it after you left.
Maybe not.
Somehow the mic came on.
If the clerk, Mr. Halpern, would see if his... The gentleman, the clerk of the Rules Committee is not able to effectively communicate. We'll shut that door. Direct you. Mr. Halpern, it seems to speak a little bit louder. I think. No, it's not. We are not in normal processing, so I would just like for us to, for just a few minutes, for us to speak clearly and carefully, and the gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move the committee grant H.R. 351, the LNG Permitting Certainty and Transparency Act, closed rule. The rule provides 1 hour debate, equally divided control by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the bill shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions of the bill. Finally, the rule provides 1 motion to recommit.
You've now heard the motion from the gentlewoman. Is there amendment or discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I
Gentleman from Massachusetts.
the rule, I move the committee grant H.R. 351 an open rule so that all members have the opportunity to offer amendments to this bill on the floor. And I would just say that Mr. Whitfield had his impulse was right. We ought to open this process up, and the chairman says he wants to, get us all closer to working together. But I think we need more than just kind of an assurance of that. We need a process that allows us something different than the same old, which is more closed rules. So I think this is this should be embraced by both Democrats and Republicans, and I urge a yes vote.
You've now heard discussion and the amendment from the gentleman from Massachusetts. Further discussion. I'd like to address the issue if I can. Most assuredly, I want you to know how much I respect and appreciate your words. When I looked at this earlier today to make a recommendation on behalf of the committee that I would pitch to the entire committee as well as my Republican colleagues, I was not satisfied that we knew enough about the implications of the shipping clauses. It, in fact, could have been made in order because the parliamentarian, everybody said, it's germane to the bill, it'd be fine. But it has not been understood. And so I think Mr. Garamendi understood, Mr. Whitfield, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Plum. I offer nothing but accolades for what they have done here. But in the spirit of the process, I think they also see where they got some work to do. There's more work to do on this, and so I would offer, with great respect to the gentleman, the advice of another.
I would just say,
Jump strike.
yeah, I'm not looking for accolades. I just want to.
Well, I think you're entitled to some occasionally, Jim. So let's just take those if you get them. All right, we'll now vote on the McGarvey amendment. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
No. The noes vote.
Roll call.
Gentlemen, ask for a roll call vote.
Ms. Fox?
No.
Ms. Fox, no. Mr. Cole? Mr. Woodall?
No.
Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Burgess?
No.
Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Stivers?
No.
Mr. Stivers, no. Mr. Collins?
No.
Mr. Collins, no. Ms. Slaughter? Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings?
Aye.
Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis? Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the total.
2 yeas, 6 nays.
And then it's not agreed to for amendment or discussion.
Mr. Chairman?
Gentleman from Massachusetts recognized.
I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order and give the necessary waivers for amendment number 1 by Mr. Garamendi, which would lay out in its purpose section the national security argument that transporting American LNG on U.S.-built and flagged ships, which render it complicit with our WTO obligations. The second section requires that LNG be transported on U.S. flagged ships until 2020 and on U.S.-built and flagged ships thereafter.
Now heard the amendment by the gentleman from Massachusetts discussion. Those in favor, gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Chairman, while I, during the questioning, appreciated the amendment, certainly additional information came to light during your questions about the readiness and our ability to actually carry forward with this. So, you know, as much as I like the spirit of it, I don't think I'm going to be able to support that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen. Further discussion.
I would
Gentleman's recognized.
just say to the gentleman that if he had voted for my previous amendment, then Republicans and Democrats could have worked out any differences and nuances necessary so that we could get it perfect. I don't think there's any problem with the gentleman's amendment, but that's all we have left. So I thank the gentleman for his comments, and I urge the aye vote.
I thank the gentleman. Those in favor of the Montgomery amendment, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
No.
I ask for a roll call.
Gentleman asks for a roll call vote.
Ms. Fox?
No.
Ms. Fox? No. Mr. Cole? Mr. Woodall?
No.
Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Burgess?
No.
Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Stivers?
No.
Mr. Stivers, no. Mr. Collins?
No.
Mr. Collins, no. Ms. Slaughter? Mr. McGovern?
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings?
Aye.
Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis? Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the total.
2 yeas, 6 nays.
Amendment's not agreed to, not agreed to. Further amendment or discussion, seeing none, vote now be on the motion from the gentlewoman from Grandfather Community North Carolina, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
No.
The ayes have it, the ayes have it. And this will be handled by myself and Mr. Polis. Mr. Polis. I want to thank the committee for their hard work today, the staff coming in despite the snow, have delivered another strong performance. I do not expect another meeting this week. This finishes the work that we had for today. We're done.